Controversial climate scientist Paul Burgess has made several claims based on his interpretation of climate science, which conflict significantly from the general consensus reached by climate scientists who say that we need to act swiftly if we are to avoid our climate becoming so extreme that we are unable to live in it. Mr Burgess refutes this consensus, but on today's programme, Energy and Sustainability Centre directors Adrian Cowin and Ralph Peake, I suspect, will challenge Mr Burgess's perspective. So you will have listened, presumably with as much interest as everyone else, to Paul Burgess's views, opinions, which were expressed on last week's Perspective programme. He made quite a lot of claims that I'm guessing the pair of you would disagree with. So Ralph, if we start with you, what did you make of the programme, I suppose?
I thought it was a very difficult programme to follow. What Mr Burgess did was actually conflate facts with omissions and to actually omit certain facts to back up his belief. And I don't think really that's a fair assessment and a presentation for the public, really. I think if you're going to refer back to certain IPCC information and tables, you really need to convey the sentiment off those tables, not just cherry pick one item. And
of course, as a scientist, what scientists do is they look at all the relevant information and then they reach conclusions. Generally speaking, and I found this very frustrating, certainly when I was a minister, and having studied it as a biochemist myself many years ago now, I kind of understand the scientists' approach here, but scientists are quite loath to reach conclusions. They try to present the facts and explain what they find, but they don't tend to say, and therefore, minister or government, whatever, you must do such and such. Paul Burgess, on the other hand, was much more eager to offer his advice, wasn't he?
Yes, I heard your comment there when officers presented you when you were a minister, one thing and the other thing, and it was left to you to decide. And I do get that, because you don't really want decisions made by officers. The politicians are put in place. They're meant to be the eyes and ears of the public, and they're there to make those decisions. Difficult decisions in lots of instances. But just going back to one of the tables Mr Burgess kept going on about was this table 1212. Now this was in the IPCC. It is the report. IPC AR6 report. Now it is large. And
just remind us again, that was produced.
It was 2021.
2021.
So quite a few years on it now already. But it is quite difficult to find the evidence because there's 3 reports, and the particular report that this table's in is the physical science basis report. So there's 3 AR6 reports, and this one here is the physical science basis. And correctly, as he said on page 1856, you'll find table 1212. And what Mr Burgess was intimating was that there is no evidence that we've got man-made issues which will heighten the droughts and the flooding.
And he was quite selective in what he was suggesting there, wasn't he?
Yes, and that's the crux of this, really. It's quite clear in the table that the IPCC and all the scientists, with high confidence, say there's an increase in mean air temperatures, extreme heat, cold spells. There's a reduction in your cold spells. There's a reduction in the permafrost, which will release methane and CO2. There's a reduction in the sea ice, the temperatures there, which will then cause the sea ice in that Antarctic area. So you then get the lessening then of the Arctic. And then it goes on that tables are extreme high confidence in the ocean mean temperature, in ocean salinity. There's a decrease then in the dissolved oxygens. And then others, we've got the atmospheric CO2 at surface, a high increase. These are all facts which have already happened, and the IPCC are showing those on that table. They also then bring more in, which will then start emerging, and by 2050, we're going to see under the rain table, we're going to see the mean precipitation increase increase in areas of the world which are around the Arctic, Siberia, and those mid-latitudes. And we're going to see a decrease in the rainfall in the Mediterranean areas and southern Africa. So these areas where people are living, we're going to see a lot less rain.
And of course, again, in the interest of fairness, I suppose, what he was saying, Paul Burgess, was that there is no measurable, or there's no ability at this stage for scientists to say that these things are happening. Basically, flooding, heavy precipitation, landslides, severe winds, storms, these sorts of things, which it's fair to say we've seen a lot of on the news of late. Yeah. But basically the IPCC is not claiming that these things are a direct result of climate change.
Yeah, and that's really that's one single event, isn't it? So it's very hard to pinpoint the effect of man-made burning of fossil fuels on a particular event, a single event. What they're doing is absolutely with certainty claiming that there is a change in these larger areas, and that's what will then lead possibly to single events. But certainly by 2050, they're saying that the sea level is going to rise.
Adi, you're a weatherman. Climate and weather are different things, aren't they?
Well, yes, they are. Certainly weather is generally the here and now and the near future, and well modelled and well predicted and used daily, and also used for best attempts at severe events as well. And the best example of that as a developing science that's made the news recently is the correct predictions of the early arrival of the ferocious impact of a Category 5 Hurricane Beryl in the Caribbean. And that's just one example of how well weather models can cope with the physics of the atmosphere.
So then just explain, I mean, I suppose this report that was being quoted from was 2021.
Yes.
If that report was being produced now, is it more likely that they will say that in the already emerged in historical period that these things have happened?
Yes, that's the direction of flow as more research data is analysed and papers come forward, ready for the IPCC as a body to mull over and come up with their executive summary. That their next summary will come to a consensus agreement by most scientists and recommendations, and that some of these climate impact drivers will be firmed up. So, for instance, the temperature aspects and the heat extremes, which are already high confidence, will go to the next category, most likely with further evidence of virtually certain. And so the ones in the areas where there was low confidence, because as scientists, they're not saying there's no link, they just said that for the moment, until we have more evidence of events, such as droughts and rainfall individual events in certain regions, we can only have low confidence. But as 1 year, 2 years, 5 years, 10 years rumbles on, you gather that data and that evidence, and your confidence levels will change. So those areas that are currently shown in the report as low confidence will presumably, I would suggest, become higher confidence, because you've got more examples of linking these things together as a result of what we call climatic impact drivers.
And going back to my point about scientists not being willing to make decisions for ministers, they will provide the evidence. I mean, you've had this as in your former role as a senior Met man at the Met Office. Snow days, for example. Yes. The minister desperately wanting to know the night before whether she can tell, or he or she can tell the schools that they won't need to open the following day. And you being in the position of a scientist, basically saying, on the one hand, this could happen, and yet on the other hand, it might not.
Well, that's right, and that's the nature of understanding the model and how things work. And in this case, it's the weather in a particular location. So you're part of a multi-agency advisory team. As a weatherman, you give your briefing and your level of confidence. And, I can go along to some meetings, and I have done, where I've said there's an 80% probability this will happen. It recognises the fact that there's a smaller chance that it might not be as bad as feared. And you work like that, and you inform, in this case, politicians or decision makers at a multi-agency event, and that might be about road closures, the schools opening, and that's what you end up doing in my sort of world. And beyond the Isle of Man and those little decision-making processes, the whole world has got that process going on, and the likes of the World Met Organization have a specialist unit working now increasingly for making decisions about disaster relief and disaster prevention, and they are pulling in all this sort of information, weather models, and also looking forward to emergency planning, not just the here and now weather, the emergency planning for what does weather impacts because of climate change look like in 10 years from now, 20 years from now, and beyond. What are the things we're going to put in our manual to think about mitigations, resource, assets? So, and those, again, the scientists will say this, and other inputs to that decision making, and lo and behold, an elected decision maker will make that decision.
And what is also clear is that whereas you may disagree with Paul Burgess's interpretation of the science, and he's every right to make his own interpretation, and probably it's a good thing that the conventional wisdom is challenged from time to time. What is also clear is his opinions are being lapped up by a significant proportion of voters, certainly in the Isle of Man, I suspect in the Isle of Man, but certainly across Europe. Why do you think it is that despite the best efforts of the sort of collective scientific community to explain what they believe is about to happen to us, or is already happening, that so many people are much more eager to believe that actually this is all a made-up nonsense thing and there's nothing we can do about it and we should just carry on the way we are? I don't know. Ralph, would you want to answer that?
I think you've actually just said it there at the end there. It's to carry on the way we are. You don't have to change then. It's much easier to carry on. We've had a joyful 50, 60 years of fossil fuel. It's been cheap energy. It's grown our economies around the world. People have made an awful lot of money from it. And it's easy. It's easy to come home and have your gas boiler heat your home. It's easy and it's relatively cheap. Okay, we've had a spike over the last few years, but that gives an indication, and a spike in the 70s as well, the oil crisis, Suez oil crisis. But those spikes show you how the market can really fluctuate, and that's not really what you want in business. That's not really what you want as a consumer. You want prices that you can consistently plan your budget for, and we believe that's what renewable energy does do. It gives you the certainty of what the cost will be. Drilling down to whether wind doesn't blows too hard, those are the details, but the overall strategy and policy needs to be with the cleaner energy that's abundant here on the Isle of Man. And when you look at the Isle of Man, we've got great wind resources, and the data now shows that we would only lose 4 days a year because it's too windy, and only 24 days a year because it's not windy enough. I mean, that gives us a huge amount, over 8,000 hours, 8,100 hours a year of time when we can generate that renewable energy. So yes, we need to have some storage alongside that for those days when the wind's not blowing, but we need to get it in perspective that the storage doesn't need to be a month.
Again, let's go on to that. I mean, other comments, claims made by Paul Burgess included that storage is going to be a hugely expensive option. And if you don't have storage, then you have to continue with some form of fossil fuel energy production. And actually having a mix of wind and fossil fuels creates a more expensive solution. Certainly that was the argument that the MUA were putting to me maybe 10, 15 years ago when I was a minister pushing for wind farms, and they were resisting at that time. So I don't know. I mean, where do you want to start in relation to those claims?
Well, you're absolutely right about if you just turn the Pulrose power station down a bit, it becomes less efficient. So you do end up using more per kilowatt hour of gas. That's a fact, and we all agree that. So it's really then having an alternative way of generation, and the generation can be with renewable energy, and then you store it. I mean, fossil fuels is just a store of energy. It's just that we're burning it and releasing all that energy.
So how do we? I mean, I think the figure mentioned was something like £3.4 trillion to introduce a storage system that would work for the Isle of Man based on current technology.
Well, we have actually modelled this in the first white paper we produced, and we produced a series of information cards where we actually did cost out what it would cost to actually have energy storage in batteries, in pumped hydro, in hydrogen, in small nuclear reactors. We've done a lot of that research. Dr. Dave Quirk is at the centre of all this at the Danish Technical University, and he's been able to get at those figures and actually produce them in a way where we can easily understand them. So we know the cost of them. We've actually had people from Norway here on the Isle of Man to look at the geology to make sure that we can actually drill down and actually create underground reservoirs. That is all possible, and it has all been costed.
And the costs approximately, are they near the 3.4 trillion that was being
We
quoted?
put together an energy system which included hydro storage, pumped hydro storage, and we estimated that would only result in the customers paying 19 pence per kilowatt hour. Now, that really is not quite taking us back to where we were a few years ago at 16 pence, but it certainly is a long way off the 30 pence or 28.5 pence as of today that we're paying. So these figures really are attainable and doesn't have to be borne by the government, by the taxpayer.
I mean, you're avoiding giving a specific answer there to how much the storage would cost. Is that because you don't know off the top of your head? Or
Well, off the top of my head, I haven't got that fact here now, but it was round about £1 million per megawatt hour.
Right.
That's the cost of a battery, and the hydro storage came in just under that. So the hydro storage is cheaper, and that includes the digging, the drilling, the implementation of all the pumps. That is the cost of it. So when you can then work that out of how many megawatt hours you actually need over how many days or how many hours you want, and you have the evidence of the wind over years, decades. So we know with some certainty, the scientists will know how many hours we will have to generate and how many hours we will need when the sun's not blown and when the sun's not shining and the wind's not blowing. So you can then model that and see how many hours of storage you actually need and then cost it out. And that, as I say, comes back to that figure of 19 pence per kilowatt hour.
And £1 million per megawatt hour sounds like an awful lot of money, doesn't it?
It does sound like a lot of money, yes. £1 million is a lot of money, but when you can see what security it gives you, rather than the millions of pounds we're spending each year on fossil fuels, which is going straight off the island, straight out of our economy, whether that's in fuel for the home, whether that's transport, or whether that's for the power station to create energy, you can see now why the MUA, under the Electricity Act, have a right to look at the most economical way of producing energy. They now see that wind will generate it at that lowest price.
So the £1 million per megawatt hour, there must be more to this, because you're not going to spend £1 million every time you need to use a megawatt hour. This is effectively over the course of maybe, I don't know, you tell me, decades.
Yes.
So for every megawatt hour that you're going to need to store, it's going to cost you an upfront £1 million and then spread over how many years?
That's right. So a battery may well have a life of 20 years, 25 years. Pumped hydro has a life of, with some maintenance, has a life of over 100 years. There's hydro schemes in Norway that were built in the early 1900s, still producing energy. Now,
so how then are your figures so much lower than the figures that were being suggested by Paul Burgess?
Oh, I don't know what he's including in that. He may be including nuclear reactor, by the way. I mean, small nuclear reactor, a lot of people like to do. I mean, I don't know how many politicians would stand up and support that, but if you just look at the cost of that, that's at least 3 times the cost. So I've never met anybody who wants to pay 3 times the energy cost now. I know we've had to pay twice as much recently, but there's been a lot of resistance to that going on. So why would you want to put a resource in that's going to cost you 3 times the amount. Now, I don't know how he arrived at those figures. Maybe it'd be interesting to find out, maybe not. But we're confident of the figures that we've got, and we will be producing for the public later on this year. Before the end of the year, we're going to have a new model which will have an energy system in the model based around an app, so people will be able to go on their phone and actually put together their own energy system for the island, and then it'll actually work out what it would actually cost. We really want... The one thing that Mr Burgess has done is ignited a debate and created more interest, and I welcome that. I welcome people, even if they are just believing what they're said by him, get involved, do your research, find out those informations. I mean, MUA have put a lot of information on their website. I think they're taking the attitude now that everything they're getting in, they're wanting the public to see, and it shows you there all the wind speeds are on there, the latest wind speeds, and a good explanation of the difference between capacity factors and load factors. A lot of those get misunderstood. They're all on the website for people to read and to hopefully improve their understanding.
Well, I'll bring in Adrian Cowin after the break. You're listening to Perspective with Adrian Cowin and Ralph Peake. So Adi, then, you must be, well, I don't know, you tell me, are you concerned that the debate seems to be getting polarised between those who basically are on Mr Burgess's side of things, saying, well, actually, no, the climate may be changing, it's possibly something to do with the solar cycle, and there's nothing we can do about that other than perhaps adapt to the likely changes. And then on the other hand, we have the climate action side, where people are convinced that climate action is necessary. I think possibly Ralph alluded to this earlier, but is this because, is the part of the problem that maybe both sides aren't really prepared to even countenance that the other might have some reasonable points?
I suspect you're right in that respect, Phil. The open and transparent conversations to understand the other side of the story are perhaps not happening as widely as they should. And so that communication and learning, sharing of information, a different viewpoint, a different opinion, they're all valid, as are different research papers. And in the world of science, you give a university professor and his team the resource to carry out some research, they will come up with some new information and their conclusion to present to their peers for review. And that may change the state of play, of understanding amongst themselves and their colleagues, but also on the other side of the playing field, that other team may say, "Oh, we never knew that before. Now we know that. We can see the points you're trying to make and what you've been trying to say for the last 10 years." So I think those elements of development and research are very good. Understanding on both sides very good. My concern in particular though about this is the delaying tactics. In my opinion, and my opinion I hope is as valid as any other scientists, we're now getting to the stage where actions of some sort have to be done. Sitting around with no action is not an option anymore for the way forward. And indeed, most countries on the planet have taken actions towards renewables. They've laid out their policy for their reduction of burning fossil fuels and other methods of improving the environment we're living in the planet. And, it's our turn now. Small as we are, we're special on the Isle of Man, but we have got an abundant resource in the form of wind. Mature technology and engineering and science has led us to this position, and it's time for action in that respect. But as a physicist, I'm quite excited about the opportunities and the challenges ahead, and I hope I live long enough to see them, because there are some exciting things to come. But the engineering, science, technologies are not quite in place yet to use them now. But we can buy some time and improve our situation for energy security, energy price point. All those things are achievable in the near future. And if something else comes along by 2040, 2050 and beyond, then that's great. That's more ways forward. And I was interested by Mr Burgess's comment about I know there has been comments already about small modular nuclear reactors. As a physicist, I find that all very exciting. I like that bit of physics when I was studying nuclear reactions. But the one that's exciting, but it is under development, it's not there yet as a commercial proposition, is the stable salt reactor that he mentioned. And that is exciting for prospects for the future. If it development gets it to the stage where it can be deployed commercially and safely, and what I've read, the estimates on that are maybe 2040 and beyond, if it happens. Just like we got excited about fusion power.
Yeah. So 2040, if as is proposed, we get a wind farm in 2026. It'll have presumably a 25-year lifetime. So possibly round about the time that would be thinking about being decommissioned, we could potentially move on to this new technology.
Well, you'd like to think there might be an overlap. Again, another transition period, which is essential. You've got to have some stability up to a certain date and beyond as you develop, maybe implement and research and commission the next project. And as you know, commissioning a project at best seems to be 5 years, but more likely to end up being 10 years, the bigger and more complex the projects can be. So if you can buy some time to get to that next transition period with an easy, accessible, affordable solution for the Isle of Man, then I think we should grab that opportunity as soon as possible and get on with it.
And one thing that Paul Burgess did agree with me with was actually better insulated homes and cheaper energy solutions, more sustainable and cheaper energy solutions isn't a bad thing. The area of difference between what you're saying and what he's saying is his claim is it's going to be much more expensive to go down this route. But as you say, you're both directors of the Energy and Sustainability Centre, and you have costed figures suggesting that you can knock or reduce by maybe a third the energy costs of citizens in the Isle of Man.
I think that's the case. That can be demonstrated, and the app coming out from the ESC later in this year will allow everybody, individuals or organisations, to tap in their numbers for what's the energy future and the cost of their energy future would look like on the Isle of Man with available technologies. And some developing technologies can be included in that at the currently known prices. And you can take on board that. You can punch in your number for a nuclear reactor coming in at 1.8 billion on current prices, perhaps giving us power for 20 years. You can punch that in and see what that looks like, and you'll see how much more expensive that sort of route could take you in. And the one that's talked about quite a bit on the Isle of Man is tidal and wave power. And you can punch that number in and see where that is. But, that engineering and that technology and the lifespan of those technologies is not there yet. And indeed, that's where I agree with Mr Burgess. He did comment himself that they're not efficient enough yet. They're low yield and they're high cost. Yes, I agree with Mr Burgess. So, there are aspects where we can correlate opinions here that we say, yeah, we've heard what he says and we agree with that bit. And that's helpful maybe on the Isle of Man, because there's still a minority who still say, but we've got the tide and we've got the waves. Well, sorry, folks, that doesn't work for the Isle of Man.
Yeah, and I suppose then the only area, or the most significant area in terms of energy solutions that you disagree with Mr Burgess on is the wind turbines are more cost effective than he suggests.
Well, there is difference of opinion there on published information and data. Some of it very easily accessible, and but as a developing technology, wind turbine technology, and where they're located, we're getting new information annually from around the British Isles and beyond. And yes, wind turbine technologies become more efficient, getting more output per megawatt of design than we were 5 years ago, never mind 10 years ago, much more efficient. And those efficiency factors are rising, which is excellent to see. For the onshore developments around the British Isles that we know, one of the best examples quoted is in Shetland. And, you're getting a capacity factor from their facilities of the order of 43 to 48% on recent data.
And the suggestion, though, from the MUA is that we're expecting optimal capacity, or according to what Paul Burgess said last week, and I'm pretty sure this is what the MUA have been suggesting at different times, 85%, 74% or 57% have been suggested. And the MUA recently issued a statement correcting or a correcting statement as far as they were concerned in relation to what Mr Burgess had to say, saying that they felt that the figures that they're quoting are reasonably accurate and based on the information they're getting in. Also, what is clear is the highest load factor in the UK is from I think it's High Wind Scotland, a floating wind farm, which has a 57.1% load factor. And then the average onshore wind load factor, 26.34%. The best, most productive onshore wind farm in the UK is Viking Wind farm on Shetland with 48%. This is still some distance away from the unless we were somehow to mimic the floating offshore wind, which, as you will know as a Met man, offshore wind is much more constant and easier to harness or the energies required. Mm-hmm. So it's unlikely that we'd be able to mirror the very best 57.1%. So are the MUA sort of gilding the lily a little bit here?
Well, I think, again, it's a data gathering exercise perhaps that has led to this variation of expectations, and the data is still being gathered. So I applaud them for accepting that more data, site-specific data, needed to be gathered using the SODAR technology, which can sample the wind speeds at different heights above the ground, because there is that relationship. The higher you go away from ground level, you get more wind. And more wind equals more power in that cube relationship, transfer of wind speed to energy. That is the truth, and Mr Burgess mentioned that. So there's that angle, and I think that data will actually, and so far, has been higher than early models' expectations for the area, in particular over the hills of the Isle of Man. And I think that's down to the fact, really, that in some ways, our hills, our upland areas, certain upland areas, can mimic a maritime environment. The maritime wind flow, for instance, from the prevailing wind direction of southwest, at a height above ground level where you escape turbulence and friction, will probably pretty much, in my opinion, mimic the wind flow you'd expect to get in a maritime environment offshore.
Okay. So
you could be achieving figures based on the data, and it's only 6 months data published so far, of approaching 55% capacity factor from those wind data. So that is world class, world beating with the new information. It could well be that it's more like the ballpark, but even accepting that there may be some give and take on those data figures because the sample size is not big enough yet, we're knocking on the ballpark of 50%. And again, that mimics or replicates recorded values operationally that they're achieving in Shetland at 48%.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think really the improvement is with the new technology wind turbines as well. They're much larger and more efficient motors. And if you add that to the height of the land on that coast, you can see why you get such a high wind speed. And I think the figure quoted on the MUA site is 13 metres per second at 200 metres over the lands, which is a very high wind speed and very consistent at that height. So if you add that to the new technology and the fact that this wind farm is only just under 30 megawatts. So, the MUA can take all of that energy that's being produced 100% of the time. And that's the difference. The curtailment in all the calculations, in all those UK wind farms, have to have curtailment in because they've got over, if you like, base load, whereas this wind farm is only going to be sized at under that minimum capacity. So if it was 40 megawatts, for instance, they'd have to include the curtailment figure, but because it's under the 30 megawatts, they don't have to, and that's how they're calculating it. So that's why it looks a bit different to the rest of the figures in the UK. Plus, as I say, the fact that all those onshore wind turbines in the UK are over a decade old. There's been very, very little onshore wind in the UK since the
well, certainly in England.
In England, yes.
And I presume then you must be encouraged by the announcements this week from the Labour Party, the newly elected UK government, that the moratorium on onshore wind farms has been lifted.
Yes, that's an exciting future really to see, and I think the more we can get used to seeing these wind turbines erected in places of efficient wind speed, the better. We just want to get used to that. I can see why people don't want to move to an area we've not had before. But really, when you look around the world and you see the benefits of that clean, green energy coming into the network and being used by households and keeping that energy cost low, the Isle of Man really should be a part of that.
And I should say, I always do at this juncture, I do have a conflict in relation specifically to the planned Erie wind farm, in that I'm a close neighbour of it, but also I have a conflict in as much as I was a minister that pushed really hard to get wind farms built. So that conflict out of the way. Adi, just one thing specifically about this. I mean, you mentioned there that potentially the Erie wind farm could match offshore wind sort of capacity. One thing that, I mean, this is just a basic question. You've got these big cliffs. You've got the sea. The wind blowing in off the sea. They hit these big cliffs. The wind that must go somewhere. So presumably turbulence must be created in some way. As I say, you're the meteorologist, not me. So, is that likely to cause turbulence in the air? I don't know, 500 to 800 meters further in.
The answer is yes and no. To quote Mr Burgess, the way he answers, it all depends on the state of the atmosphere on any particular day, and by that I mean how stable what we call the boundary layer is. The boundary layer, generally speaking, meteorologists talk about the boundary layer between sea level and 2,000 feet above sea level, and that's what's also known as the turbulence layer. And that how willing that air is wanting to be disturbed is described as the stability of the air. In its most stable form, we get inversions. Those inversions are really stable. They trap a layer low down in the atmosphere, and one thing is that increases friction. Another one is that it can also trap pollutions. So that's inversions when it's most stable. When it's unstable, the air wants to mix freely, horizontally and vertically, and those are the two extreme states. Going over any hills, you will induce some turbulence. How much turbulence depends on that stability on any one day. Getting away from ground level, the further you get away from ground level, you have less turbulence for a start. So essentially, the bigger your height of your wind turbines, the better in that respect. You'll get into more what we call laminar flow. That laminar flow is more steady and constant, which is what you want, rather than the peaks and lulls and the gusts as such, and the turbulence. And creating less turbulence after it's the passage off the wind turbine as well. So you'd have less vortices going beyond the turbine area. So there will, I do accept there will be some turbulence, but the taller you are, if you're a wind turbine, the taller you are away from the ground, you reduce that turbulence.
Okay. Well, I think we've agreed to differ with Paul Burgess. There are a number of points that I think you've agreed that he is correct on. It's just perhaps his interpretation of some of the facts is an area that maybe you disagree with. We have about 10 minutes left on the programme now, and obviously your organisation, the Energy and Sustainability Centre, had a recent public relations exercise. How did that go, Ralph?
Yes, we went to the Belfassan Church Hall, and we had a very lively afternoon. We were there for what turned out to be 5 hours, but it was great really to get to make ourselves available, to answer questions and to listen to people. And so we had a debate at the start. We had about a 90-minute debate, really. We let the public decide what the agenda was and how we'd like to have the conversation. So we had laid the chairs out in a circle, and we listened to them and answered what questions we could.
And lively debate is political code for...
Yeah. And it's right, it started right from the start, to be honest, and it was great to see so many people mobilise themselves to be there at the start. And yes, there's a lot of fear. There's a lot of fear, a lot of anger as well. It would probably be good for the current politicians to listen to what the public are saying. But really what came across, there's a lot of repeats of untruths, of misleading information, and that really, that was quite apparent throughout the day, really. So it does show you that the public are listening, and that's why it's important to really have facts, to talk about the facts and to talk about and actually balance.
This was one of the points that was probably the constant theme in the debate for the annual climate change report that was debated in Tynwald. I think was it in June, Tynwald. The constant theme from members was actually we need to be more focused on how this is going to impact on the Manx public. How is this going to benefit Manx people, as opposed to what some people at least think, which is this is going to be a significant additional cost and they will get no benefit out of it, and the landscape will be blighted and all of these sorts of points.
Well, the landscape is going to be loaned, if you like, for the current technology, and it's not to say in 25, 50 years' time there'll be a different technology, something that people are working on now. But for now, if you just look at what's available now, there's a technology that's available now, onshore wind. We have got the space for it on the island. We have got the natural resources for that, and that's what is the best choice for now, for 2024. So I do agree with the current Chief Minister to try and get the push to
that's an interesting comment. The current Chief Minister, are we expecting a change?
Well, I only served under the previous one, so well, I've got no idea, Phil. You probably know more than I. But I think what we're trying to do, though, is get some motivation and some momentum behind this, and that's what's heartening to see. We can take the opportunity now of technology that's available and benefit from that for the people now to really get those energy costs under control and to, as I say, have them more consistent so we can then plan our lives and plan our businesses.
Do you think part of the problem, and I don't know, Adi or Ralph can answer this, part of the problem is people have seen government projects going significantly over budget, maybe not working as well as they had been promised they would work, and would it not be better to get private sector to that have experience to run these things, and then the only risk that we have is that private sector company might, increase the charges more than we'd anticipated?
Well, we've always pointed to that really in Energy and Sustainability Centre, and that really came highlighted in the James Curran Impact Report. a public-private sector partnership. That's what Professor Curran called for. He didn't think it'd be possible for each party to do it by themselves. You certainly need government involvement. You need to get attention there, and you need some legislation. But the industries, the private sector, they're the ones. Certainly, in most of the other energy organisations around the world, it's the private sector that have the experience, the knowledge and the investment potential. And as long as you have the right contract in place, and that's what you'd be looking for from our political members, is to get the right contract in place where we can deliver what's required to deliver an affordable energy price. That's what the contract should be. It sounds simple, and I appreciate it'll be a lot more complicated than that, but you must stick to those principles and make sure you know what you're getting, and having people on board who have the experience to negotiate and deliver a contract like that.
Adi, I mean, you're relatively new to the Energy and Sustainability Centre, certainly the newest director that I'm aware of anyway. Why do you think it is that government hasn't completely embraced everything that the Energy and Sustainability Centre is putting forward?
My guess is that they may be not giving us perhaps enough of time to listen to us and read our product. I do get it. There's a lot of information for them to digest. Some of it's in a technical language, which is not suitable for everyone, including politicians who have different skill sets, perhaps. But I think if there's a realisation that the open conversations of taking input and asking questions about that input would happen in a more timely manner, we could move on and we could get away from this period of procrastination, which is no help to anybody. The delaying tactics, one way or the other, from whichever side, we're losing time when there's a period of action.
What the Chief Minister, the current Chief Minister, as Ralph calls him, what the Chief Minister will say is actually this is one of the things that we really are pressing on with now. There are arguments as to why this wasn't pressed on with over the decades past, but he will argue that they're going at it with some pace.
Maybe if you've got a lens of the Isle of Man lens of pace, which is always a different pace on the Isle of Man, as we know. Well, we'll see what comes in 30 years from now. Well, when we're beyond that now, and I was talking to Professor Curran in the last several months, and his frustration is you've got this information now, you've got pathways that are clear and sensible, and his frustration is, well, just get on with it and make those decisions and maybe change some policies, have those conversations beyond government with business and private investment, and look for that joint venture to just get on with the work that's needed.
I think you're right.
Go on. Sorry, Ralph.
Chief Minister Cannon has shown leadership in this area, so it is good to see that.
Well, and then the final question then to you, Ralph. How optimistic are you that if we're making a similar programme to this in 5 years' time, that we'll have an offshore wind farm, an onshore wind farm, we'll have cracked storage, and our energy buying public will be seeing the benefits of a more sustainable and lower electricity price?
I do think in 5 years' time, Phil, that we will be looking at an onshore wind farm, a small one, which will actually allow the public to see it and get involved, to reduce their fear and to actually support it. I really believe that. Offshore wind, that is going to be further away, but what I really expect is that we will be partnering with Ørsted, that we will be using a worldwide company like that to actually have an offshore wind farm in our territorial waters, and I do think we'll be looking at a cable that comes from that wind farm to the Isle of Man, so we can enjoy that offshore wind as well and turn that into energy. That is what I think we will be doing in 5 years' time.
Well, thank you, gentlemen, both for giving a different perspective to the one we heard on last week's programme. That was Energy and Sustainability Centre Directors Adrian Cowin and Ralph Peake. So what do you think? Summarising, this week's guests agreed with some of last week's guests' comments, but fundamentally disagree with the interpretation of the science. If Adrian and Ralph's figures are right, though, a 30% reduction in our energy bill and a more sustainable energy supply has to be a good thing, regardless of whether our climate is changing. Until we have an active, sustainable energy system, I suppose the debate will continue over whose figures are right. Don't forget this programme is available as a podcast on Manx Radio's website. For now, I'm Phil Gorn. Gora Myers and Geisha Crum. Thanks for listening.